Hello and welcome to the CFB Supershow, brought to you by the FTN Network. I'm your host, Walt Waddell, aka Dubdeuce85, and as you can see from the banner behind me, we're doing it. CFB college football, daily fantasy, sports season long, dynasty prize picks, props, sports betting. We're going to be doing all of that when it comes to college football, and we are simply less than 2 weeks away from week 0. In fact, DraftKings has dropped that week 0 slate for us. The actual schedule for the week 0 is 7 games. There is the Notre Dame Navy game earlier in the day, Jacksonville UTEP. Those games not on the slate. Perhaps we'll get a 2-gamer or perhaps a showdown of some sort. So those ones won't be on that particular slate. Now, the week 0 full slate breakdown, where we're talking about prices and depth charts as they're coming through, that's going to be next Thursday. I will have my co-host, partner in crime, Jake Kuchek, on that one, so there'll be no more solo Walter Waddell anymore for the foreseeable future for college football. We'll really delve into that slate and break it down. Today, I'm going to do kind of my first look of week 0, give you something to test over the next 5-6 days before we really get into it. And as those depth charts start to materialize, as they start to roll out, as we're getting starters named, there are still a few teams here on this slate and throughout the college football season that are not named just yet. So this is going to serve as my first look for the DFS slate and just these teams as general. The 5-gamer ending up being UMass versus New Mexico State, Ohio versus San Diego State, Hawaii versus Vanderbilt, San Jose State, which is going to be a fun team, versus USC, which would be everybody's favorite team, USC, whatever. And then FIU versus La Tech. So there's definitely some, intrigue here with this slate. We can tell already the masses are going to go directly for the USC game, right? I mean, we can tell based off of a couple of things. Fantasy goodness, there's a lot of players on the team that are expected to produce at a high level, potential Heisman winner at quarterback. And then, of course, a lot of people, when it comes into college sports, they'll go and look at totals. And they'll go and they'll look at this 44.5, 49, 55, 59, 64.5. Oh, my God, I got to do it. I got to stack up that game. It's a high total. This thing in DFS, you got to stack these high total games because there's going to be so many off. Give me a break, man. Okay, cool. So we know that game is going to be stacked up, and we know people are going to be talking about at length how stackable that game is. Great. We're reinventing the wheel by telling you that. So where we're really going to be looking for some of this additional edge that we already have with college sports, can confidently say that, is with some of these other games. Might we be able to find somebody on the lowly UMass team that's just, been a long time since that 1998 FCS title. It's not been great football so far. It's probably not going to be a great season for them, but there might be some players that we can look at here. Hawaii, there's going to be a guy on Hawaii that I'm going to be super high on. Usually every year I'm connected to a Hawaii combo running back wide receiver that does quite well for us on those late night slates, and people just don't seem to want to roster them because Hawaii hasn't been that good the last couple of years. So we have that on this slate. We've got La Tech and FIU with some sneaks on this slate. We have the other side of the USC game in San Jose State that has some players that I'm definitely going to like. And then, of course, we have a little bit of action going on here with the Ohio Bobcats and a few teams that are just really not that exciting with New Mexico State, San Diego State. But I think that we can definitely derive some value here. And what I want to do is kind of talk about what teams are having positional battles still. What does the projected depth chart look like for these teams, and just giving you a little bit of my thoughts on players that we're going to talk about more at length next week. So if you're watching live, I appreciate it. Please make sure you slam that like button. Interact with the show. If you're watching on demand, drop comments, anything at all. They all help the show. They help the FTN Network. We have a lot of fun stuff going on. Also, thanks to Mid-Major Matt, who is putting together a redraft CFB League 10-man. There's going to be a small buy-in, but that's mainly going to be a situation where we hold the draft, and then we're going to do a bit of content where we talk about and analyze the teams and players and kind of just give you something else additionally there to watch, those college football fans that are out out there in the audience. All right, so that's coming down the pipeline. I'm still doing preseason NFL content as well. My man Mike Randall, he's covering the weekday slates this week. I will have that gigantic, ginormous, huge slate on Saturday. We'll have a very robust breakdown of that one. WNBA stuff still, the season's grinding on. Next week, we have FIBA World Cup basketball, DFS. Of course, our man Quisenberg, the DFS basketball god that he is, my good friend Zach, he's going to be covering that. But I'll be in the Discord. I'm going to be playing that. I love international basketball, World Cup, the Olympics. We did really good on the Olympics a couple of years ago, so we're going to be playing that as well. And then really rolling up our sleeves and hitting that week 0 hard. The college football Discord on FTN Network is going to be popping, so make sure you're a part of that community. If you're not already, get over to FTN Daily, use that code DUB, get yourself a discount, and let's ride out this profit together. I'm extremely excited for college sports. College basketball is right around the corner as well. It's just crazy. We had our little break. We got to do our previews all summer long. Hopefully you guys got a chance to check out the college basketball stuff that I did, as well as conference by conference breakdown of college football. But now it's time for us to get into these DFS slates. Now it's time for us to actually build these bankrolls. And look at what DraftKings, let's pull this up real quick. DraftKings rolling out a little bit of goodness here, making it exciting. It's funny because I had been looking at DraftKings today a couple of times because I have this feeling like there's going to be a slate popping up today. I feel pretty strongly about that. And I was checking and nothing. And then it's been busy at my work lately. And I get 18 million messages at once about, hey, the slate's up. And I was like, I knew it. I had just checked 15 minutes before. So exciting stuff to see that. But you look at it, 50,000 the first up top, that $15 GPP, 11.7 thousand people. It's going to take one hell of a lineup to win that, but that's a nice little prize there to bring people in and get them to play some of this other stuff. If you got the bankroll to play something like the $44 3K to first, 397 people, that's a lot more manageable of a tournament to win there. That's kind of my personal specialty, is some of the single entry stuff. And it doesn't have to be just the high dollar where there's 6 guys. Like, these 400 or 500 single entry GPPs, these are the ones that I really feel, at least for me, I'm best at. And that's what I'm going to be playing majority of the season. But I will throw a couple here or there, of course, in the MME pool, especially if there's a version of the mini max and things of that nature. I'm definitely going to be playing heavy action this year and betting a lot too. So you can see the betting tracker over on ftnbets.com. We will have all of that throughout the season. And man, let's get going, because I am excited and I'm really hyped for what we have for you this season. All right, so going through it, I'm just going to do the classic tried and true game by game, starting it off, kicking the slate off, UMass versus New Mexico State. It's not a game that really drives a lot of excitement. I think most people, majority of the more casual players, or people who are just kind of dipping the toe in the water, getting ready, want some football action. That's not the XFL, CFL, USFL. No disrespect to those. I cover those leagues and I like them, but some really popular football and getting a chance to make some money here. People are going to look at that first game and they're going to write it off. And that's going to be a question that you see a lot. Like, hey, do we need any exposure here? Is 8 players too much from the USC game? Can I run 3 wide receivers with Caleb Williams? Like all these questions. There's not going to be a lot from UMass here. So I want to really kind of give my deeper dive, in addition to the first look of the slate, but deeper dive on these teams here. UMass, like I said, a team that's really struggled. They went to the FBS level in 2012. It's been pretty tough. 3 wins in the last 4 seasons. Looking to turn things around. I don't think that's going to suddenly happen this year, but they do have some pieces that are intriguing for fantasy purposes. At this current moment, they do have a 3-man battle at quarterback. Familiar name for some of you, Clemson/Georgia Tech transfer, Tyson Pumachan. It's a very tough last name to spell, but a very easy one to pronounce. So I appreciate that a lot. Definitely a guy that I think has, in my mind, from what I've seen and read, from practices and scrimmages and stuff. Looks like he's in the lead, but it's still a true battle going on. But Pumachan has looked very, very good. He has dual threat ability, somebody who will definitely put up numbers for this UMass team. Obviously going from Clemson, Georgia Tech to now UMass, high pedigree there. You like to see that talent translate and really dominate some at this level. Brady Olson, who threw for 791 yards last year, 2 touchdowns, 8 interceptions, also in the mix. Woo! But he's definitely looked pretty good in camp. And then Carlos Davis, who I'm actually kind of excited about him as well. Western Carolina transfer, threw for 1,800 yards, 16 touchdowns in 7 games as a starter last year. He also rushed for 221 yards. In the game they played at Western Carolina against Georgia Tech last year, he did throw for 233 yards and 2 touchdowns. He was also picked off twice, but those were kind of one was his fault, one was not so much his fault. But that just shows you that he was able to play against some upper-tier competition. Not that Georgia Tech's upper-tier competition, but a higher-ranked conference opponent that he actually played well in. Now, Carlos Davis has been lighting it up in the last couple of scrimmages, and somebody who feels like has an opportunity to maybe pip Pumachan there and get the quarterback spot. Now, none of those guys are going to be main team viable options, but if you're doing that early MME thing, all of these guys are super cheap. 4.5K for Davis, 4.8K for Pumachan, and then 5K for Olson. The 5K for Olson actually feels pretty bad. To me, he's the worst of the 3, but he could definitely get the gig. And they have some pretty intriguing receiving options too that people aren't going to know the names of, but have built immediate rapport and chemistry with the 3 quarterback options. At running back, they return Kayron Adams, 300 yards and a touchdown last year. Greg DeRozio's 210 yards and 2 touchdowns. Now, they do have a transfer from Arizona in Jalen John. Did not play last year, but in 2021, he rushed for 250 yards. So, again, at the Pac-12 level coming to UMass, certainly looks like he'll get some playing time and some snaps early on. And then Jackson Paradis, who transferred in from Buffalo. He redshirted last year. He was the 2021 New Hampshire, that's right, New Hampshire Gatorade Football Player of the Year. So certainly has talent, somebody who will be getting some carries for this UMass team, I'm sure, or else he wouldn't have gone there, right? So their running back room, not that exciting. Probably multiple guys getting carries. For DFS purposes, it's not ideal. But again, if you're running these early season MME stuff and you're doing different combos, I do think getting some exposure here to this UMass offense could be intriguing, but more so the wide receivers. Now, the top returner in terms of statistics for wide receiver for them is George Johnson, 28 catches, 402 yards, and a touchdown last year. But it's actually Anthony Simpson, who is another Arizona transfer on this UMass team, who has been absolutely lighting it up in scrimmages and catching touchdown after touchdown during these practices. Obviously, practices and scrimmages are a lot different in the game, but he is the one that these quarterbacks are looking to. Now, he's mainly a kick returner during his time with Arizona, but he's, like I said, he's been absolutely tearing it up, and I'm pretty intrigued by him in GBP because he's probably not going to be that owned. You come down here and you look, he's 3.5K. Nobody on this receiving team or on this team is above 3.9. The primary name that I think people might know a little bit more is Mark Pope, who also transfers in, spent 3 or 4 seasons at Miami, transferred to Jackson State, backed out of Jackson State, then decided to go there, only had 1 catch for Jackson State. Apparently some drama, some stuff that happened with Coach Prime, Deion Sanders. Neither one really going into the details of exactly, but they just didn't work out. Mark Pope has a ton of talent. He's been in the collegiate game for feels like 6-7 years at this point. He does have 52 catches, over 600 yards, and 4 touchdowns over the course of his Miami career. So looking for that fresh start to end his career on a high note, somebody who also is going to be getting a lot of targets for this UMass team when they actually throw the ball. And then they also hit up the transfer portal pretty well here. Another option, Christian Wells from Appalachian State. 4 years with Appy State, 37 catches, almost 700 yards, and 10 touchdowns. Christian Wells was never a guy that we really talked about on classic slates, but Appy State seemed to be on a metric S ton of showdown slates. I don't know what it is about the Fun Belt, but we got these Fun Belt showdowns, and Christian Wells was somebody that we talked about on those showdown slates and produced fairly decent. Look at his overall 4-year numbers, 37, 610. Not that exciting, but individually he had some pretty nice games for us in the past. And then a convert to a tight end from running back, a 300-yard rusher last season, Gino Campiotti, will be either the TE1 or TE2, somebody who is versatile, probably still get some carries, even though it's a bit of a crowded running back room. And we'll be getting some looks as well. Kind of like those converted tight ends, like if they're a quarterback initially or a running back and they become a tight end, we tend to see them put up some pretty solid numbers. They see the game a little bit differently. They played those other positions and they know where to be. And we've seen some real success with those convert players in the past. All right, moving on to their opponent, New Mexico State. Diego Pavia sitting atop the depth chart after throwing for almost 1,500 yards and 13 touchdowns last year. Much more of a viable option for fantasy purposes for his rushing ability. Almost 510 yards, 6 touchdowns. He's much more confident this season. The coaching staff's been talking him up. If you've been able to see any videos on socials, you see he's much more poised. Could be one of the more sneakier options whenever New Mexico State is on the slate this year, because I don't really think people are going to be looking to them for quarterbacks too often. Obviously, with some of the quarterbacks on this slate, it doesn't make a ton of sense to use him as a main team option. But again, one of those guys, maybe we can super flex him, or maybe we can get him in there, sub 10% ownership on a small slate, and have him potentially put up a big game with his legs. At running back, Star Thomas, Jamani Jones, and Monte Watkins all return. Star Thomas, 518 yards, 5 touchdowns. Jamani Jones, 383 yards, 6 touchdowns. And Watkins, 248 and 4. All of those guys will get touches. Not that ideal for DFS. And then the main options in the receiving game, Reggie Akels, who is an Independence Community College transfer, just 6 catches for 166 and a touchdown, but he played on both sides of the ball, has that designation of ATH and true athlete, and he was a somewhat coveted transfer at that level. So he'll factor in somewhere, somehow for this New Mexico State team, but it'll be one of those situations where he does nothing one game and then he'll catch like a 50-yard touchdown the next. So it'll be tough to really pinpoint that. Cordell David and John Brady, the other 2 primary returners. Cordell David, 24 catches, 343 yards, 4 touchdowns, and John Brady, 23 catches, 310 yards, and 3 touchdowns. I definitely see Cordell David's name come up the most when you look or read about these receivers. Really, it's a situation, though, where it's not going to be ripe for stacks or anything like that. The pricing on this particular slate, there's a ton of guys who are blatantly mispriced or intriguing options that are pretty cheap. Nobody in the receiving room for New Mexico State is above $5K. But when you look at some of the prices of the other cheapies, 4.7 for David, I think we could probably spend our money a little bit more, and we'll talk more about that aspect next week. Mainly would be a Pavia running naked, but they didn't actually give him to us for very cheap, 7.4K, which is playable. It's doable. When you look at some of these other prices, like AJ Swan at 8.5, which could work. Can all the Vanderbilt quarterbacks are priced kind of almost comically, backups for USC comically. So there are a bit of some expensive quarterbacks here, but we have plenty of value and underpriced guys at other positions. We can make this work. Might this be a 4 running back week? I don't know. Do we want to start the season off that way? We might. There's some options we'll talk about. But moving right along here to the next game, a little more exciting, or at least people will know these names a little bit more. Ohio, the Bobcats versus San Diego State. Curtis Rourke coming off that torn ACL, supposedly good to go, should be fully healthy. I don't foresee him not being, the week 1 or week 0 starter. Coming off those injuries can be tricky, but in the year of 2023, it's much different than coming off a torn ACL in 1988. You see these guys coming back sometimes even better. It's ridiculous what we're able to do in these day and age. So I like Rourke, of course. I think he's a little bit of a different player than his legendary brother, Nathan. Now, you look at, I just mentioned how quarterbacks are a little bit overpriced for my taste in some of these options. Rourke is not at 5.5. Assuming that there's not a surprise like CJ Harris is in there or something, like these Ohio quarterbacks are all pretty cheap and definitely usable. Rourke is a guy that we know put up some pretty sick numbers throughout, over 3,200 passing yards, 25 touchdowns, just under 250 rushing yards, 4 touchdowns. Again, Nathan, his older brother, a little bit of a different runner, but Curtis can definitely get it done in that aspect. At running back, Ohio gets back O'Shawn Allison. Missed all of last season, all set to take over the RB1 gig for Ohio, and then early on gets the shoulder injury. Did have over 1,200 yards and 6 touchdowns over the course of his career, and has 32 catches for 250 yards and a touchdown. So Allison, assuming he's healthy and good to go, he will factor in with his injury, and obviously Tuckle, graduating on 2 years ago. Sia Bangura was put in a position to handle the rock a lot, and he was ridiculously good at doing that. Over 1,000 yards, 13 touchdowns, also a viable pass catcher, 27 catches for 226 yards and 2 touchdowns. Now, Bangura is obviously good. Now, I think it's important to note, though, with Allison, being back, he's certainly going to factor in. So do we want to jump in and take the Bangura stock at, 7.2K with Allison looming around there, perhaps McCormick still getting some carries and then Rourke stealing some rushing work? It's a little bit tough there for me to necessarily want to pay that price on until we see how that carry share is going to end up, panning out. Now at the receiver spot, this is really where I want to delve into and get most of my exposure for this particular game. They do bring back a healthy amount of production. James Bostic's the only one really relevant in that receiver room to go away. 33 catches for 600 yards and a touchdown. Not a lot of equity there as far as scoring, but a ton of yards gone. They do bring back Sam Wiglusz, 73 catches, 877 yards, and 11 touchdowns. Clearly going to be a WR1 type player that everybody uses on match and slates. Jacoby Jones, 45 catches, 777 yards, and 6 touchdowns. And then Miles Cross, who pretty much operated as a WR3, WR4, 47 catches, 560 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Really nice group of pass catchers that Rourke has to throw the ball to. And at tight end, Tyler Foster, 13 catches, 185 yards, and 4 touchdowns. One of those guys don't end up using, but have a game where he scores 2 touchdowns and people are like, what? How did I not see this? Like this Ohio offense, they're going to be fun for sure. You're not getting any of their pass catchers for super cheap unless you go with Cross, who's clearly, like I said, probably the third option yet again at 5'6". Wiglusz is going to cost you at 7'1", but if you were to play Rourke for sub 6K, you can make that pairing work. Super, super affordable overall. All right, moving on to the San Diego State Aztecs. I'm not that excited about Jalen Maiden, but, this is his gig. Over 2,000 passing yards a season ago, 12 touchdowns, did rush for 230 yards and 3 touchdowns. So he has some value there as a dual threat guy at times. And there are going to be some random offensive explosions for this Aztecs team. That's how they've been the last couple of years. Running back spot for San Diego State was tough. It wasn't easy to peg. Multiple guys getting touches. It does look to me clearly that Keenan Christon is emerging as the starter and the guy that's going to get majority of the work. 261 yards and a touchdown a season ago. Remember him? He was in that crowded backfield years ago for USC as well. Had a 100-yard rushing game back in week 12 of last season. A guy that I think can carry the rock and contribute a little bit as a pass catcher if they give him that opportunity. 5'6" is a fair price, and I think that he's certainly main team viable if what I read is true, and he is going to get the lion's shares of the carry. Back up and possibly pilfering touches at times will be Cam Davis, who's only 600 cheaper than Kristen. We'll see about that, but right now it's Keenan, and that's where my want and exposure will be. Wideouts, Tyrell Shavers and Jesse Matthews, both gone. That's a huge chunk of the production. The top 2 returners, statistics-wise, Mekhi Shaw and Felipe Wesley. Those are the top 2 guys. We should say not statistically for Wesley, but the top 2 coming out of camp. Shaw, 29 catches, 350 yards, 3 touchdowns. Wesley getting a ton of love in camp and practice. Not a lot of snaps and targets last year, but it looks like he's going to slide in there and be a guy. They do bring in a transfer from Western Carolina by the name of Raphael Williams, 47 catches, 650 yards, 6 touchdowns. I am lukewarm on him. Solid stats last year for Western Carolina, but it sounds like he's pretty much behind those 2 guys and will be WR4. He'll have some games, but not a guy that we're probably going to be able to use with any consistency unless you're running, a million different lineups kind of thing. All right, moving along to Hawaii versus Vanderbilt, and this is where it gets exciting for me. Hawaii has historically been a team that I've been able to personally hit with regularity. Now we have some bump games from them, of course, but something about that late night, 2 to 5 game slate that we get. I'm not talking about the afternoon. I'm not talking about the night. I'm talking about that late night slate. It's late for those of you on the East Coast. It's typically Pac-12 games. RIP. Some Mountain West, some like West Coast teams, or Hawaii's playing on it very late, and it's a big edge on that slate. And Hawaii's been a team that has really done us well, and typically at the running back / wide receiver position. Now they do have, of course, the legend himself, Timmy Chang, who wanted to do a little bit different of an offense last year, but it is time for them to go back to that classic run and shoot offense that everybody loves, especially DFS players and sports bettors. There's going to be a lot more fantasy goodness for this Hawaii program with that run and shoot offense. Now at quarterback, it's Braden Shager again. I'm not the most excited about him. He will have the opportunity to chuck. He's 6'7" for this one. So, we saw 3 of his last 4 last year. I believe he passed over 40 times. He's going to have that opportunity for a lot of 300-yard games or more. We need to see that accuracy be more consistent. Cut down on his turnovers and really master this run and shoot offense. Because if he does, he can be a very viable option. And typically we want to have that Hawaii quarterback if we're looking to use other guys throughout. Now, I want to talk about Hawaii running backs over the last couple of years. Last year, the low-owned guy that popped for us was Dedrick Parsons. 830 yards, 11 touchdowns. He also caught 30 passes for 171 yards and a touchdown. It wasn't the season I was hoping for. It was still strong. He did well. He was cheap for a while, and like I said, low-owned. Then his price went up, and it kind of became hard. 2 years before, the year before that, so 2 years out, Day Hunter, our super sneak, 651 yards, caught 19 passes, 163 yards, 3 touchdowns. Ended up going to Liberty last year, I know, but he did some nice things there. And then Calvin Turner, who they converted from running back, still gave him carries, but used him out of the slot. Rushed for 316 yards and 8 touchdowns, but he led the team that year, 73 catches, 876 yards, and 4 touchdowns. Running backs, regardless of this offense being the run and shoot, have typically, absolutely, the last few years at least, completely dominated. It's a lot of words in there, I know. The man that we want to pay attention to now and is the heir apparent and really won't have to share quite as much as like Hunter and Turner did, cannibalizing each other. Even Parsons last year had to share to a degree with this kid that I'm going to talk about, Tylan Hines. Hines last year kind of almost quietly rushed for 634 yards, 2 touchdowns. The main reason why Parsons didn't rack up over 1,000 was because of Hines' emergence. As a receiver, he caught 9 passes for 82 yards, so a little bit to be desired there. But they are going to use him all over the field. Out of the slot, he's running, snaps out of the slot. He's going to be getting heavy carries. They're going to be passing in the ball. They're going to be he's going to have the most touches out of this offense. It's going to be a very fun, back to its origins, under Coach Jones, and it's going to be a really fun one. Timmy Chang's going to really, I think, get this offense back to where we expect it to be. I don't know that they're necessarily going to be winning a ton of games with regularity, but we don't care about that. They're going to be in shootouts. So to me, Hines is going to be an absolute fantasy monster, and he's only priced at 4.7K, which is absolutely hilarious. I don't think we'll get him at like sub 10% like we typically get Hawaii running backs, because I think at this point the slate goes up. We've got 10, 11 days. People are going to be able to just toss this slate over and over and look at all angles. And I just don't think Tylan Hines goes under the radar like past Hawaii Rainbow Warrior running backs have done for us. But he's absolutely a main team core play. It's not even a question for me. I don't care if he ends up being 90% owned. Tylan Hines is just such an easy play. Even the only thing we can hope, maybe, like looking, I didn't talk about it, I'll do it at the end, like the current odds over on DraftKings has Vanderbilt at 17.5-point favorites. Hines is going to be immune to blowouts, even if that happens. And it's still Vanderbilt, right? Like, Vanderbilt, I don't know that they're going to be blowing teams out very much. So I question that line a little bit. I question the total being only 55. And I hope that people look at it and say, well, Hines, he's not going to, he's cheap, but he's not going to get the work, because he is going to get the work regardless of the game script. I am very, very confident in Tylan Hines being a optimal play for this 5-game slate. The receivers, there's going to be a multitude in this type of offense. You'll see a different name almost every game kind of lead, so that's going to make it tough. The two that Chang has spoke the most highly of is the Kansas transfer Stephen McBride, who's coming in, and he's extremely high on Coley Nishigawa. So those are the two that he likes. I don't know if there's going to be anything into that. When you look at the pricing, guys like Jonah Pinnock, who known from last year, comes in at the highest price. But you look down at McBride, 3.7, if he's truly going to have a role on this team after not doing a whole lot for Kansas. And then Nishigawa, who's the stone min at 3K. We get some more info about him. The depth chart comes out. That could be a hell of a nice play at 3K. And you might have a little nice three-man Hawaii stack here brewing with Shager, Hines, and Nishigawa. That won't cost you too much. All right, the Vanderbilt Commodores, they're going to be nice. I kind of dogged them a little bit, but they're certainly going to be okay. Swan at 8.5 feels horrific. Likely the starter. Over 1,200 yards last year, of course, 10 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. He's gotten a ton of hype throughout the offseason from Vanderbilt fans. There is a chance maybe that Seals gets some work. There's 3 other quarterbacks getting snaps. So we'll see. But that 8.5 price really just pains me. That one I'll take it as as we get closer, we'll have a little bit more of an idea of what ownership might look like. If Swan's a guy that people are just all in on, I might be underweight and just deal with it. And if people are coming to the same conclusion as me and that feels way too high, then I might want to up my GPP exposure there. So I'm going to let that be dictated by ownership, which is generally not what I do with the play, but that 8.5 price is a little bit aggressive for my taste. Running back rotation for Vanderbilt is interesting. Cedric Alexander, who is the freshman coming in, priced at 3.7. From all accounts, or at least what I've found so far, is that he's going to get a heavy workload. It's most people are feeling like Patrick Smith, who's a main returner from last year, and Chase Gillespie. All of those guys are going to get work and get touches, of course. And Gillespie, he showed early in the season that he was capable. Their game last year against Hawaii, he had almost a 40-yard scamper. I recall that one. He looked good early on. So, getting some work. Patrick Smith, more of a bowling ball guy. But like I said, Alexander, to me, from what I've seen and what I've read, looks like he could be the actual guy. And at 3.7, that's a nice little, on the opposite end, if Vanderbilt does win by 20 plus, they're giving the kid work. They want to get him ready. You don't want a freshman back going into the SEC about to get pummeled without getting a decent amount of work prior to that. The Hawaii game is a perfect opportunity for that to happen for him. So I am certainly liking this game, multiple pieces from this one, especially if people are going to go full stack in the next one we're going to talk about, the San Jose State game versus USC. For San Jose State, speaking of Hawaii, former Hawaii guys, Siobhan Cordero, 6'3", a very reasonable price, probably underpriced. Love Cordero. He's in the main team player pool. Absolutely. Capable of throwing up 35 plus fantasy points. We know that. He had a really nice end to the season last year. 3 of his last 4 games, he had over 24 DK points. We saw him throughout. He struggled against opponents like, upper tier SEC type opponents, but against other Mountain West crews like Wyoming and UNLV, he really spanked them hard. He does have a nice ability to put some zip on the ball, but he can also run a little bit as well. We saw him rush for 265 yards a season ago, had 9 touchdowns on the ground, 23 passing touchdowns to 6 interceptions, over 3,200 passing yards. So Cordero at 6'3" is a bit of a gift here. The USC team, defensively, we'll see, but they score a lot of points, but they were also giving up a ton of points. So I'm not necessarily looking to get away from Cordero, and if that ends up being a chalkier play, I'm certainly okay with it for that reason. At running back, Kyrie Robinson back in the mix again. He is, been with the team for a few seasons, has been a decent, I will say, fantasy option through the years. Never really an optimal or a main team guy to me, but the 5.9 price is intriguing. Now, I do like Quali Conley. And I was hoping that it would come in without a box score, but for his Utah Tech numbers, but that was not the case. DK went ahead and put like a box score for him. So I do like Quali Conley a lot at 4.9. I think the Spartans, they typically like to run multiple running backs anyway. So we'll see Robinson get work. He'll have big games here and again. But Conley is somebody that I'm pretty interested in. At Utah Tech, he rushed for 1,000 yards, 8 rushing touchdowns. Somebody who certainly can vibe in this offense. I think he has better pass catching ability than maybe his numbers will show based off what I've seen here on watching the little scrimmage videos and stuff. But I am disappointed to see that his Utah Tech box and game logs are here for the public to see, because that means he won't be as sneaky as he possibly could have been. On the USC side, obviously, I'm super thrilled that they should have just been like 10-5. Like, I'm glad they priced Williams up, but it probably won't matter, right? Like, people were going to have to pay whatever possible price they were going to do. Like 10-2 was, I think, the highest last year we saw. He ended the year at like 8.886. Anything below 9K would have been absolutely atrocious. 99% ownership. At 9.9, it at least make people think about it for a moment before just simply clicking him in. Because the problem is this. You look at the quarterbacks, Swan at 8.5. Oh, my God. Williams is up there. Then you get down here. You've got Pavia at 7.4. He's clearly not going to have that same type of upside to get there. Shager, who I like. Cordero, who I like. All for cheaper. But the problem is Cordero's still going to probably score under Williams, right? And Shager's certainly, not going to score above him either. This first game, USC is going to be looking to just completely light it up. And I feel like fading him is very dangerous to the point where it's only a 5-game slate. He hangs one of those 40-45s up. It's just going to be super difficult to overcome. Now, if it's one of those 30, like 30 to 32, you can potentially get away from that because Cordero puts up 30. Shager, one of the other running backs, if we like the 4 running back thing, which for the record, I'm not so sure about at this current moment. You can get away from that high price. So GPP wise, there are going to be some good, opportunities to fade, but in those high dollar and just the cash games in general and single entry stuff, I think it's probably borderline psychotic to not have him in your lineup. And that's coming from Captain Leverage from Washington, from the West Coast. So if I'm telling you to play him in your main, you probably should, because I'm looking for a reason not to. Running back, the room it's going to be crowded as usual, but Austin Jones is there. They do bring in Marshawn Lloyd from South Carolina. It's going to be a pretty nasty 1-2 punch. Now, Lloyd didn't have the greatest end to the season, but he popped off for some 20, 25, 30 type of games. He'll certainly be able to catch the ball, turn some big plays out there. 7.4 is a little bit rich for me to play in a backfield where, Austin Jones is still probably going to see 18 plus carries. They're both super highly priced. So this is one where, you're playing Caleb Williams, but you're just hoping that he steals the rushing touchdowns from those guys as well. Now, the running back room doesn't particularly that wide receiver room doesn't get that much easier either. Now, they don't have Jordan Addison. Okay, there's all these targets. He's off to the pro level. Now we know it's going to be a concentrated group, right? Like, we know right where the targets are going to go, right? No, they are ridiculous with it. They not only have Super Mario back, Mario Williams, right, who 40 catches, 630 yards, 5 touchdowns. Could have had a much bigger year, but of course, Addison's getting fed. Taj Washington, who I still love. I can't even believe Taj has eligibility left, but man, I love Taj Washington. 50 catches, 785 yards, 6 touchdowns. Him coming back. He's not been practicing, but we'll see what happens over the next, few days here. Brendan Rice back, somebody who, 39, kind of quietly, 40 catches, 600 yards, 4 touchdowns. The, Michael Jackson kid, 17 catches, 200 yards, 4 touchdowns. Like, there's some good quality returning pieces here. You lose Addison, you feel like, okay, everybody moves up a peg, but then they go out and they bring in Dorian Singer, who absolutely blasted off for an Arizona offense that was way better, at least in the passing game, than I think people would have thought, or most people thought. Over 1,100 receiving yards, 6 touchdowns, 66 receptions. So you bring in a high volume guy to replace Addison, and it kind of puts everybody in the same position. But not only that, they convert Raleek Brown, who I know my man Kuchek likes, and we'll get his take next week, from a running back to wide receiver, when, to end the season, he was kind of playing a little slot anyways, but now he's like a true blue slot guy. And it kind of further clouds or muddies the waters there for targets, because they're going to use Brown. I mean, he showed the last few games of the season how good of a pass catcher he could be. And then you bring in the freshman who's just an absolute beast at tight end, Deuce Robinson, who is more of a pass catching wide receiver archetype type of tight end, and they're going to use him in wide receiver sets as well. So you have another pass catcher to further mess things up. And you also have Lake McCree back at tight end, who showed some promise at times too. 10 catches for 100 yards and 2 touchdowns, but at the end of the season, he was starting to get targeted and making some things happen. So I do have my eye on the Deuce Robinson kid, who's at 3.6, but it's going to be very risky because there's going to be a lot of targets in this offense, but it's not going to be super concentrated on a game basis. Clearly, there'll be games where Singer completely just shatters the slate. There'll be times where Super Mario shatters. There'll be a 2-touchdown game for Deuce at the tight end spot. Raleek will have a 100-yard receiving game. This offense is just loaded. And then you'll have those games where the running backs just punch it in 6 times, right, between the 2-3 options that they have. So it's really going to be tough, I think. And that's where we might be able to get away from these full game stacks that people are going to be talking about, because yes, there's going to be, one of those 3 receivers that people take, or 2 or whatever, that could say Mario Williams is the one that goes for 30 and Dorian Singer, puts up 10. But Singer in those Mario lineups is tanking them because he's 30% owned. And, all it takes is that opening for us to kind of find another spot to get in, or Tylen Hines goes off at low ownership, for example. If that happens, like, we're going to have some opportunity here for some leverage. Not that I'm advocating like, hey, we're fading USC. Like, I'm not saying that, but I don't think it's a foregone conclusion where that production is going to come from. However, they may just score so many points that everybody gets theirs. That's a realistic opportunity as well, which really kind of just takes me back to roster Caleb Williams. It's not exciting. Well, it's exciting. Don't get me wrong. It's not, mind-blowing roster construction to just say, hey, roster Caleb Williams, but I think that's probably where we're at this current moment. All right, and then the last game on the slate here gets a little bit more tricky. FIU, Florida International versus Louisiana Tech. Now, FIU gets Grayson James back, who's their quarterback last year, threw for almost 2,000 yards, had the double 11s, 11 touchdowns, 11 interceptions. Did run the ball a little bit. Like, you see there's some games where he had over 50 rushing yards, 43, 37, 47. So he's got a little bit of rushing ability. He didn't get up to 220. His completion percentage under 60%. He's okay. What I'm seeing, though, is a ton of hype, and rightfully so, for Keon Jenkins, who, highly rated recruit, flipped from Auburn originally to FIU. His hype, we're talking right now, is kind of stratospheric. Looked amazing and borderline amazing in the spring, into camp and practice and scrimmage and everything. He's continued to look solid. Now, I do think it's probably a situation where Grayson James gets the nod, but the leash might be short to the point where if he makes a boneheaded error too, we may see Jenkins quickly. Or it might even be a situation where James, starts, but Jenkins gets in there, on the next series. He's not cheap enough to really be saying, hey, let's just dive all in on him at 5.7. He's certainly cheap, but if he would have been like the 4 or 5, min price for a QB, I think I would be kind of talking this one up a little bit more. And we still, like I said, have a whole nother week. Next Thursday, we'll be back with a more in-depth with the slate, depth charts, more coach speak, more message board findings. But as of right now, Keon Jenkins looks like a pretty intriguing guy and they're talking about he may be one of the best quarterbacks in FIU history by the time it's all said and done. So that kind of hype deserves at least some recognition. At running back, they do have a transfer from South Dakota, and Shamore Lawrence rushed for 600 yards and 3 touchdowns. He is the most expensive guy at the running back spot at 6'2". Not really exciting for me. The running backs for FIU are kind of overpriced in my eyes. Looking at the wide receiver room, Jalen Bracey, Chris Mitchell, Dean Patterson all sit at the projected top, or the top of the projected depth chart, I should say. Chris Mitchell, 23 catches, 350 yards, and 4 touchdowns a season ago. Jalen Bracey, 39 catches, 300 yards, and 2 touchdowns. I like Bracey's upside quite a bit. If I had to take one receiver on this roster, I think it would be him. But I'm not, really knocking at the door to roster any of these FIU guys, except for maybe like a Jenkins share in a throwaway lineup. The Louisiana Tech side, I think, is more interesting for DFS purposes, short term and also for the season. They do bring in everybody's favorite Boise State quarterback transfer, Hank Bachmeier. Now, we at FTN gave up on Bachmeier extremely early. Kind of noticed that he just didn't have it, for lack of a better term, and the rest of the industry kind of figured that out as we went too. So coming into Louisiana Tech, more of a low pressure situation. It's kind of weird to say like Boise State is a pressure situation, but for football, it definitely is. So I think he's going to play a lot better in this offense. There's going to be some weapons for him to kind of zip the ball out and make some plays, and I think he definitely can. And it helps that their running back room is solid. Marquise Crosby, your likely RB1, assuming he's cleared quickly. Practice, he had a leg injury, so this is a kid who rushed for almost 1,000 yards a season ago. Without him, you're looking at Jarvis Thornton to jump into that RB1 spot. He ended the season with a 130 rushing yard game last year, did almost hit the 500-yard mark for the season, sitting there at 5'4", just okay. Crosby would be better at 5'7". They do bring in a transfer from Miami, Ohio, and Tyree Shelton. He was part of that Miami, Ohio backfield that had literally 6 different guys that would get a touchdown or a reception throughout the game. It was super annoying. But Shelton definitely, came out of that crowded backfield with as good a numbers as you probably hope for. 321 yards, YPC of just under 4, 3 touchdowns, 8 catches, 40 yards, 4.2K. Certainly looks interesting depending on, what happens there with Crosby. They also had, Squirrel from Baylor, Craig Williams transferred from Baylor for his 6th collegiate season, but that didn't quite work out. I don't know if he was denied or what happened, but he's going to be a running back coach at his old school apparently. So he was originally going to be in this crowded backfield, but apparently not anymore, in case you saw that somewhere and now you're wondering where he went. At wide receiver, Smoke Harris is back and the undisputed WR1 in this offense. 66 catches, 640 yards, 5 touchdowns a season ago. There were some other guys in this receiving room, kept him from maybe having the season that I think he could have, 1,000-yard receiving yards. I think this season he has the opportunity to do so. He's really quite good. Is he 6.6K on week 0 good? Maybe not, but I certainly think there'll be slates where he's putting up some of the highest scores at the position. Looking at last year, Trey Harris really kind of stole the show as time went on. Trey Harris was just under 1,000 yards, 10 touchdowns. Even got a couple of carries there. They really kind of featured him at times. But Smoke now without Trey is going to swallow up a lot of those targets. And when you look at the prior year in 2021 when Smoke was kind of the guy, He did have 71 catches, 756 yards, and 6 touchdowns. And he's had at least 300 plus yards in 4 straight seasons. He redshirted his freshman season in 2018, where he did play 3 games, then he get his COVID year, so that's why he has that extra season now. But it looks like he's building up a good thing with Bachmeier, and like I said, he's going to be the guy there in that receiver room that's putting up the most consistent points and the highest upside for what it's worth. Other wide receivers, Cyrus Allen, Kyle Maxwell, those are both returning guys. Allen, fairly solid, 22 catches, 500 yards, and 4 touchdowns. They also bring in a transfer from Nebraska. You guys ready for this? It's a pretty cool name, you might say. It's kind of a cold-blooded type name, but DeColdis Crawford, sitting there at 3.2, maybe an intriguing GPP look there. Also another guy who's been, dealing with some various ailments, but from what I've read, it looks like he'll be a full participant. Not a lot to say about that as like a main team or flat, plant my flag in the sand type play, but I certainly want some exposure. Is it because of his name? Maybe partially, but he also has a ton of talent, and I think he's going to be a factor in this passing game, and I think they're going to allow Bachmeier to kind of wing it a little bit more, especially with the solid running game that they have. It's just going to open up things so much more. Ryan Rivera is a transfer from Cal Poly. Cal Poly had a pretty nice offense, but Rivera, 109 yards and a touchdown throughout, playing tight end for Louisiana Tech, near min-price, somebody that I have also seen building a good rapport there in the offense, and somebody that's going to have a nice rapport with Bachmeier and will be a factor at times as well. So Louisiana Tech, I don't know, I've always over the past couple of seasons had an affinity for the Louisiana Tech offense for DFS purposes, and I can't believe I'm saying it, but I think the Bachmeier to Smoke connection is going to be solid this year. And Bachmeier, he's only 5'8". We've had kind of like all over the board quarterbacks here, but somebody who I expect to certainly, start and throw the ball 30 plus times at 5'8". Could be kind of a sneaky hammer type play there. So that kind of is the slate. That's our first look. Now let's look at the lines. I usually start with this, but it's going to change. Right now, it's the following: New Mexico State -8, 44.5 total. San Diego State -3.5, 49 total. Vanderbilt -17.5, 55 total. USC -30.5, 64.5 total, and then La Tech -10.5, 59 total. Of those, I feel like that Vanderbilt line to me, man, I'm probably way, way, way off, but I feel like a bet on the Hawaii side of that feels intriguing. I would say that San Jose State can cover 30.5 because they have the offense to do that, but USC is just, I know it's going to be one of those games where the first half, like, they're in it and they're scoring. But then USC just has that sick drive where, Williams scores a touchdown in under 3 minutes. Then they get a quick 3 and out, or a boneheaded error. Somebody fumbles it away or gets picked off, and they punch it in real quick, and suddenly it's like USC by 38. It's like, holy shit, how did that happen? So I'm probably staying away from that, but I'm intrigued by it. And I do actually, believe it or not, like that Louisiana Tech line of -10.5. It might look like a lot on the surface, but this FIU offense kind of looks like it might be stuck in neutral initially until they figure out if they're going to go to Jenkins or not. I like the over 55 between Hawaii and Vanderbilt. To me, that feels like it might be a little low. I think both teams have a chance to be scoring in the 30s. And I would say Ohio plus 3.5 is interesting, but I feel like the Aztecs may just end up choking that one out, which they historically have done throughout the past few seasons. All right, so I feel pretty good about that as our first look DFS. Those of you who have grinded with me for the summer on my other stuff, I definitely appreciate it. There is going to be a vast array of content coming your way. What it'll look like on a normal weekly basis, there will be tons of other stuff too. We've got some other writers on the betting side too for college. But from me, I will have a typically like a betting article earlier in the week. And then by Thursday into Friday, you'll have that main slate breakdown. Jake Kuchek will write the midday or the afternoon slate breakdown, night slate breakdown, those ones that he does for the Saturday when we get into week one. And then in the Discord, will typically have a player pool and a core for the late night slate. And like I said, that's been one of our more profitable slates of the last couple of seasons. And then you can look at the Super Show Thursday nights. That's where we'll be doing our full slate breakdown of the main slate for Saturday. And then I'll be back every Saturday morning starting next week with the late news, any roster shakeups, any injuries that we need to know about, any rumors, resetting our core, answering any questions that you guys have. That will be happening starting next week, Saturday morning, 1 hour to lock usually. Now it's a later lock next week, so we'll see if the time will be different, but you're typically starting week one will be 1 hour prior to lock for that live show. Then it gets really fun because once college basketball starts, we'll have daily slate write-ups, and then we'll get into the MAC and the Fun Belt, and then we'll have write-ups for pretty much every single day except for Monday for the college football season. So I hope you guys are as excited as I am. I'm looking forward to it. Appreciate the continued support. I am going to continue to add on to my shelves back there in Banner, upgrading the camera, and it's going to be one heck of a season for us this year. Looking forward to it. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. See you guys next week.